Hello, my name is Stefan Sittig. Welcome to American Theater Artists Online, where we talk with leading contemporary figures in the American theater. My guest today is Colleen Kelly, professor and director of the MFA program at the University of Virginia Department of Drama, and a leading figure in the development and performance of theatrical stage combat. Colleen is a founding board member of the Association of Theater Movement Educators and past vice president of the Virginia Theater Association and the Society of American Fight Directors, where she was at one time one of only a handful of women working in a mostly male-dominated field. Colleen's work has been seen across the country at such prestigious venues as the American Shakespeare Center, Alabama Shakespeare Festival, Denver Center Theater, Dallas Theater Center, the Old Globe Theater, and La Jolla Playhouse. Her film and TV credits include dance choreography for the film Summersby with Richard Gere and Jodie Foster, and fight direction for the PBS television series Tell About the South. Colleen has been a master teacher at various colleges and universities and for projects supported by the National Endowment for the Arts and the National Endowment for the Humanities. And she has given presentations at several national and international conferences. Hi, Colleen, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you for this opportunity, Stefan. I'm sorry that these circumstances are bringing us together, but I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you and with your students, and I hope everyone is healthy and in good spirits.
They are, and they're very excited to hear from you. And also, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to do this. I know we all are trying to figure out our lives with this situation, and it's added a lot of things to a lot of people's plates. So I appreciate your taking the time. Where are you speaking to us from?
I live in Stanton, Virginia. I teach at the University of Virginia, which is in Charlottesville, of course, but I'm in Stanton right now.
Oh, wonderful. Stanton is lovely. It's a nice town.
It is.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your experience. I know that you do a lot of different things in theater, but we're going to focus today specifically because of class on the unarmed stage combat or stage combat. The class is a unarmed stage combat class, but your experience is in stage combat. So I guess the first thing I thought of asking was, when did you first come in contact with stage combat and realize that it was a thing? And what was that experience like for you?
Yeah, I think like most actors, we would run across there would be a slap or, something in a play that you would hope actors would know how to do safely and with some dramatic effect to it. So I think like most actors, my first encounter was with some basic unarmed stage combat. But I was doing a lot of dance choreography at the time, especially musical theater. Mm-hmm. And I found that a lot of musicals had these scenes that would break up into chaos. Oh. So, in Hello, Dolly, they're at the polka competition and suddenly there's a brawl, or yes. In Guys and Dolls, they go to Havana and then there's a brawl, and and
interesting.
Yeah, even it doesn't have to be West Side Story, or even in Oklahoma someone gets punched. It seemed to me that part of the formula for American musicals included these scenes that were either chases or violence or some kind of stage combat. And I noticed that my background in dance did not include that. It didn't include how do you stage these particular scenes that might involve some contact or something stylized. So I think that was my first kind of question mark about, how do I do this and how do I learn how to do it well? So that was the first thing that I think came up just in, my career in the process. And then the second was, again, related to dance. I was very interested in period dance and period styles. I went to workshops with the Historical Dance Society, Renaissance dance, and also just how how actors learn how to move with corsets, how they bow in different periods. And this would even cross cultures, you know, kind of looking at how different behaviors and different time periods. And so part of that was men wearing swords. You know, how do you sit? How do you move? How do you bow wearing a sword? And I would choreograph, let's say, the dance for Romeo and Juliet, and then I would be asked if I could do the fights for it. And it was like, well, not quite the same thing here, but, and I think that I felt confident choreographing something that was stylized, something that was either slow motion or did not have contact, you know, something that was out of distance. And I found that more and more I was starting to be asked to do that type of choreography. And so once again, I was looking at my own training thinking, I wonder where you go to learn how to do this kind of the piece of the puzzle that seemed to be missing in my own training.
So that occurred to you on your own. Nobody brought it to you and said, hey, why don't you go here and do this? It wasn't through a teacher. It was kind of your own experience doing it.
Yeah. In fact, almost just the opposite. It was almost assumed that I could do it. And I had to explain that, no, I don't know how to use weapons, or I have not been trained in this. And yeah, so that was what I started to think about and started to look around and see if there was any training.
And what led you from that then to becoming interested in it as a skill? Like, how did you go about acquiring the skills that you felt you needed to do that piece, the stage combat piece?
I think I was lucky at the time because the Society of American Fight Directors, which is, I think, known to many professionals and students nowadays, at that time, that was a new organization. And I just happened to get a flyer, you know, some kind of poster or postcard, you know, something came across my desk, and I thought, well, this sounds like maybe what I am looking for. And I did imagine that I wanted to fill the gap in my own training, that I did want to learn how to do, you know, stage these within some violence within musicals, to do better period dance work. I really had no idea what I was getting into.
So it's interesting that you see them, you see the places where they overlap, right? And so that's sort of how you approached it. So you saw that musical theater had a lot of need for this, and period pieces and period plays. So you see the connection, you saw the connections really early on.
I did, yeah. I saw them and wondered how to fill in the gaps.
Right.
Yeah.
And so then you went off to the SAFD, or did you do like one of those summer workshops, or did you get one-on-one training? How did you take that next step?
I did. I went to a summer workshop with Society of American Fight Directors, and when I got there, I was a bit surprised, a bit out of my element. I had never even had fencing, let alone any kind of martial arts, or it was really a new vocabulary. And I'd say, when I look back at it, I think that one thing that held me back in maybe learning the work quicker than I could have was I was trying to filter it through a dance vocabulary.
Oh, yeah.
That maybe instead of just going in with a clean slate and thinking, you know, that this is not jazz, it is not ballet, it is not, you know, it is not anything other than what it is, and maybe approaching it with a clean slate and not wasting mental time, emotional time, physical time, thinking that an advance is like a chassé or something, you know? It's like, it's not. It's it's an advance. It's something that has.
Yeah, I struggled with the same things, Colleen, as you know, because I was your student, but I struggled exactly with the same thing when I first started.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that because I wanted to succeed, I was trying to pull that work into a vocabulary I understood rather than rising to the occasion to meet the demand of the really two vocabularies, a theatrical, the theatrical stage combat vocabulary, but then also the historical vocabulary of, let's say, a rapier dagger or broadsword or, small sword. And so a lot of that, I had to, I think, eventually have a talk with myself and say, okay, you need to start with a clean slate here and stop trying to make this into something it isn't.
Because it gets in the way. It does get in the way, I think. That's great.
It does.
So let me ask you this. Were you the only woman at that workshop?
I was not. I was not the only woman.
Because this was a while ago, right? So I wonder how much that,
right.
What was it? Did you
I
get
recall there may have been 3 women. I specifically recall 2 women, but yeah, it certainly was not as it is today. A lot of women seeking this work.
Did you feel any pressure, added pressure because of that?
No, I didn't feel pressure. How do I explain this? I think I was so focused on my on being overwhelmed that
by the techniques themselves.
Yeah, this was, there was a lot of stuff coming at me. I don't think I really had room to think about the larger picture of women doing this work, or really even comparing yourself to anyone else who was in the class. It was, and anyone who's been through a stage combat workshop, it can be intense, physically intense, it can be exhausting, but then there's also this learning curve of some things that were completely new.
Yeah. So you didn't feel, and no one raised the issue with you. No one there said, well, as a woman, blah, 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 blah. So it was never talked about.
I don't recall that. Not at that workshop. And I think it was pre that conversation. I think that conversation came later. And again, when I think back, I think the conversation about women, at least for me personally, came when I started to move toward teaching the work, or toward being a fight director.
I was going to ask you about that. Yeah, that was one of the things I was going to ask you coming up, is that, so as you move from learning the skills as a student and starting to master those skills and practice them and use them over and over, and when you started to get more confident, how did you then, was it always your idea to want to teach at some point, or did it sort of evolve? And then what happened when you tried to get in? Seems like, you tried to get into the Society of American Fight Directors then as I guess, going through the coursework there and going through the ranks there. What was your experience like there as well? So I guess
it's as you can imagine, it's complicated. I often felt very supported, both in learning the work and in opportunities to assist fight directors.
I was going to say,
both in teaching and in professional work. David Leong invited me to do work in New York and DC, and others, were also very supportive. On the other hand, I think questions were coming up in the society about whether women should be teaching what predominantly is a male vocabulary. For example, and I understood it at the time, I understand it now. For example, rapier and dagger was historically invented through a male body. I mean, that's, you know, that it, and what happens then when I learn the technique and then I begin to teach it to both men and women? And in my mind, I think that, and maybe somewhere the society was also going, was that we were not trying to recreate historical accuracy in as much as we are creating a theatrical vocabulary. And that's where I felt that I could contribute. Sometimes, as you know, it's, you know, you might be doing a play. I'll keep saying Romeo and Juliet because everyone does that.
Everyone does that.
But,
Example, yeah.
That, and sometimes, you know, it does need to be close to historical in terms of rapier dagger. On the other hand, sometimes it's, you know, placed in the future, and suddenly you have to figure out, you know, I go to Lowe's and go up and down the aisles looking for what weapons could I put together here,
or just make a new weapon, right? Yeah,
give me a good pipe here or something.
Right.
Yeah.
So telling the story of a good fight in a scene doesn't matter what the weapons are. Is that what you're saying? For this particular,
I think it maybe mattered to the playwright,
yes.
but I think that, yes, that the storytelling, especially with Shakespeare as it moves across historical periods and crosses cultural boundaries, I think that that it is about telling the story, and whatever weapon belongs in this particular society, it needs to make sense for the story of that particular production.
That's great. Well, I mean, I think that your experience going through the SAFD and getting that experience and going through the ranks, at some point, did you find yourself being the only woman at a certain level, or one or two or three of you? And did you guys ever talk to each other about it? Or was it more just, we're all learning this vocabulary and we're moving through and it'll be what it'll be?
Yeah, I think that maybe in passing we had conversations, but I don't think, again, I think it isn't until recently that the conversations became more in-depth and more maybe reflective of the next generation of women entering the society.
Mm-hmm.
I remember one thing I'll add here that I think maybe allowed me to move forward in the society was that there were plays that that were focused on women, like Extremities was one at the time. That and even now, plays that might have to do with intimacy, with abuse, with sexual assault. It seemed that there was a preference for having a woman choreograph that work. And so I did find kind of my own professional niche there, in that I was invited to especially work on plays that that might have women performing violence or having violence performed upon them. And what I found, again, I found another part of the puzzle missing, because now I had learned my rapier dagger and my broadsword and my unarmed, but we hadn't learned a vocabulary for intimacy. So, for example, I assume in your unarmed work that you're doing right now, you have a punch and a slap, and things have a bit of a structure to them, as if the people fighting have had some fight training. That the character,
which is not the way people fight in real life, right? Unless you've been trained, right? Is that what you're? That's not how people would fight in a normal setting, right? Like, or like a domestic setting, or a friendship, two friends fighting physically would probably not fight with
right. And
full
so
training.
and so the challenge for that style of unarmed combat was, how do you create a vocabulary that is safe, dramatically effective, but doesn't read as a vocabulary, doesn't read as, and now I'm going to do a John Wayne punch or an uppercut, you know.
Right.
How can it still have a structure to it, but yet to the audience have it look like it perhaps is a little more random or doesn't have that kind of structure.
This is what David Leon calls contemporary violence.
Yes.
Right? And
Yes.
so you were already working in that milieu, you were already working in that field, in that area, and because of the women, the need for a voice for women in a way in those plays, they felt that you were perhaps a good choice. And so you were getting those slots, perhaps, you think,
Yes.
for those kind of plays. That's really fascinating. And now with the whole intimacy, staging intimacy, which is the latest thing, it seems like you were there a while ago doing that. Not recently, it's been a while.
Yeah, I was. I just didn't know it.
You didn't know it. You knew it, but you hadn't coined it per se as they're coining it now, right? In the moment.
Right.
It's so funny how many things are of the moment depending on what's happening. But I believe that one of the founders of that intimacy is a UVA graduate student. Am I wrong? That you may have taught.
Right. I worked with Laura Reichert.
That's her name, Laura.
Yeah, I worked with Laura, although she had stage combat, I believe, with Marianne Kubik. And so, yes, I know Laura.
Right.
And yes, it's interesting how, you know, you'll find kind of networks of people.
Like ripples.
Yeah.
Well, that's wonderful. And so when you went through that training, and then I assume in parallel, or probably as you were receiving that training or getting it as part of it, you were already working with students as part of your university work and your teaching. And how did you then bring that? Tell us a bit about your experience teaching students, and what have been some of the different experiences that you've enjoyed or learned from the most, or any that stand out? I know there's a lot.
Yeah, a lot of joy, a lot of frustration. No,
Both, yeah.
Sure. I'd like to say there's a difference between, and I'll say working with students, but whether they're, you know, undergraduates or graduate students or even student professionals, or people in the community, there's a difference between teaching a class and choreographing something for a play. And
tell us a little bit more about that difference.
Yeah, I think in teaching a class, what I'm hoping to do is to give students the skill to be able to be cast in a show and be able to follow the directions of a fight director or a director, or at least take care of themselves and a scene partner if there's a moment of violence, that they're learning the skills to bring to a play, to bring to a rehearsal, and that they are learning how to work with different directors and different fight directors. That would be what I'm hoping that I am giving them. When I work with students in a play, I'm trying to help them just in the moment that is required for their character. And I think the difference might be if you're teaching someone how to dance, or you're teaching them a dance, or you're teaching them how to sing, or you're teaching them a song,
Right.
you know, to perform in a play, or perform under a very specific set of circumstances. And so I do approach those differently, even though there's teaching involved when have my fight director hat on. It's usually very, very limited to what has to be performed in that particular play.
And you usually don't have the luxury of time, a lot of time, because the rehearsal process is usually pretty quick. Correct. So you have to, right, okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's, and now talk a little bit more about the part of, you mentioned that at the very least, you want students that leave your class to be safe, to know how to protect their own selves, their bodies. And I don't think a lot is really talked about that. And I myself, having been your student, realized how much emphasis you put on safety when I first started. And that was so key for me. But I'm noticing that a lot of other classes perhaps dive right in, and there's not a lot of emphasis on, this is safe, this is, not. Um, and do you find that that's still a trend, or do you think that people are focusing more on safety, or does it depend on the teacher, or what is your approach for safety?
Yeah, I think I still have my own way of teaching that still the safety element is a component that I have certainly not compromised on. However, it might be that we're in a time now where we want some kind of instant, that's having that patience
Yeah.
of being able to learn something or to master something. You kind of want, and I understand even with paying tuition, you kind of want to get as much as you can for the money you're investing and for the time that you're investing. And so perhaps, I'm just saying perhaps that might be why, it might be tempting to, okay, let's get students who feel like they're fighting, who feel like
right down
they're,
to it.
they're
And
getting
also
something out of it.
the impatience of youth and teenagers and young adults who often want to do things quickly. They don't like to necessarily always do things very in a slow, methodical way. I encounter that with some of my students, that they want to rush right into the hard stuff. And and I'm sitting there trying to be sure that they don't get hurt. That's fine. And
Yeah.
when you're young, you think, oh, I'll never get hurt. This body will last forever.
Well,
So
there's also, as you know, in stage combat, there is a kind of adrenaline that,
yes.
and sometimes that's almost how you feel. Oh, I must be fighting because I have this feel, going on. And sometimes that can then cross a line as to where, the safety becomes compromised, because you're kind of going with how you're feeling about, being involved in that moment. And so I think it's like one step forward, two steps back, not two forward, one back. That you kind of have to think, okay, let's do this technique. Let's make sure it's safe. Let's take it up to speed. And then, whoa, two steps back here. We need to go, and make sure that it's that balance between it being safe, it being dynamic, it having a thrill to it, but that you understand not only about your own safety, but of course the safety of your partner and the audience and the scenery that's around you.
Yes.
And yeah.
But the talk a little bit more about that tension, because I always feel that there's a tension between, okay, I have a technique and I have to learn a technique and it's safe and I have to perform it in a repeatable way so I don't get injured. But also there's that I want to act the scene. I want to be in the moment emotionally. How do you separate those two when you're teaching or when creating a fight for a play? And then later, do you put them together, or do you work with them together all the time?
When I'm teaching, I try to work with them together as much as possible. Sometimes you do have to, break it out and then put it back together again. I find that athletes understand this. I mean, they can stand in front of have a basketball and just practice free shots over and over and over again. But it's only in the moment of performance that you kind of balance the technical with technique. I don't think there's anything bad or wrong with technique. I think it's when it feels technical or looks technical that's where your technique is showing. And so, yeah, I do try to always talk about intention. And I think that maybe that's the one thing that has changed for me is the language I might use in a class, such as, are you pushing this person, how would that manifest if you were trying to provoke them? You want them to throw the first punch. How is it if you just want to get some distance so that there is not a fight? And that has to do with presence and intention. And I think that you can bring that into a class without compromising teaching the technique. I think that it's like making choices in a monologue. What happens if we follow this path? What happens if we follow another path?
Great.
What I found with doing fight direction, and it's a little bit different now, but I would often be a little bit frustrated when I was asked to come in and choreograph a fight, but not given the text. In other words, choreograph the fight, but it is the director's job to actually, for the actors to be saying the lines.
The intention.
That would be the acting part of it. And that I was asked to, to choreograph the fight minus the text and the language.
How do you even do that? I mean, so
Yeah.
so you do the technique. They want you to come in, do the technique. Oh, because we don't know how to do it. So here, show us how to use these swords, and then now go away. Kind of. That's like,
Well, kind of, or even I would have to beg to have the moment before. It's like, just give me the moment that leads into the fight. Otherwise, it's going to look like we're talking and now we're stopping and now we're looking. Just let me help with that transition, the intention of when someone's blood starts boiling to actually draw a weapon. And luckily, I've had the opportunity to work with directors that I feel are collaborative in that way. But I think very early on, when fight direction was new, perhaps the fight director was not invited to collaborate with directors as they may be today.
so you feel like it's a little bit more collaborative now, that it's more recognized, fight direction as an integral piece.
Yeah, and that's one reason, and I'm going to say this, but maybe someone from the Society of American Fight Directors will correct me. But it's one reason why the term fight director rather than fight choreographer was chosen.
Yeah.
To make sure that the word director was in there as part of what our job is. And that is to direct that moment of the play. I've never said that to a director, and I won't. But,
no, and I do feel you're right. There's often a tension there because the director doesn't necessarily have the techniques or the skills to be able to create what you're bringing as the fight director. But then at the same time, they feel maybe a little helpless. And so I've had to collaborate with a few directors as well, obviously. And it depends on the director. And there's some that I can collaborate with in the room, which is great. They'll actually help me. And that's always nice when you get one that's willing to let you do your thing and then come in and say, well, I really want this moment here. And they go, okay, great. I mean, everyone's different, but I'd rather that than a director that just told me to do it and go away. And
no one's been that, I don't want to say that anyone's been that necessarily blunt about it, like get out of here. But I also respect that, many directors have put a lot of energy into creating a certain dynamic and relationship, with their actors. And then it can be, you have to trust when someone else suddenly steps in. I think vocal coaches have the same, whether or not you're working with an actor and it's like, just teach them the dialect, don't teach them about the acting part. And you can't really separate, some of that.
There's a holistic approach. How early on are you brought in as a fight director? Is it something that you're just thrown in the deep end, like for one rehearsal, or I guess it depends on how complex the piece is, but or
Yeah.
are you there from the beginning?
Sometimes I'm part of the design meetings, especially if it's going to involve, blood on costumes and and certain weapons that either have to be built or ordered. So sometimes part of the design meeting.
Mhm.
Other times I'm brought in very late because they didn't realize that they needed someone until it's like
Yeah.
dress rehearsal and they've only been marking something.
Yeah.
I think that the one thing I found that ended up being curious to me was slaps, and that was to be brought in almost before shows would open. And this has happened a number of times, that maybe I'd be brought in, because there was a slap in a show, but I wouldn't be brought in until very late into the process. And then it was like, okay, we scheduled you for 2 hours. And it's like, well, it would have been better if I had 5 minutes over a couple of weeks,
Yeah.
especially if it's a context slap, which
Yeah.
rarely, I usually try to talk the director out of that. But
Oh, I'm so glad you said that, because I said
yes.
that in class too.
But
I said
if
I
it's,
usually try not to do them. Yeah.
yeah, but if it is a contact slap, that would be, it's like, I can't spend 2 hours asking this actor to slap someone, that's not helpful. Just, I would need to back it up and do, give me 10 minutes here, give me 15 minutes here, so that it
More integral.
kind of,
More
yeah,
integrated.
it builds.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think with talking with directors about contact slaps, usually I can get down to the conversation, okay, what you really want is a really loud sound effect here. And often the face is not a good percussive instrument. Um,
You
and,
should put
and
that
it
on a
can,
t-shirt.
and it can change someone's,
Yeah.
look of their resume picture, their headshot, once their face
Yeah.
starts going offline.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so,
So achieving it through the means and the techniques of the nap and the sound, it's the audiences equate sound with the violence, right?
yeah.
That's what you're saying. Yeah. So there's no need for an actual contact. It's interesting to see how fight directors are used differently by different productions and teams at different times. But so if I have some students in my current class who love doing this work and who are very passionate about stage combat, and others who want to learn more. What would you recommend for students who have taken, 300 level class, or, an intro class like mine is, and then want to develop more of their skills, or might be considering becoming a fight director themselves down the road, or a teacher? What would you recommend they do?
Yeah, there are a lot of workshops, sometimes just even weekend workshops, and I think reasonably priced ones, so you don't have to take a loan out or anything. But I think that the more that you can learn from different people, and the more that you introduce yourself to the community of actors and teachers and directors who are doing this work, um, and to do, maybe just find a couple of weekend workshops here or there, and then if it's still something that appeals to you, to maybe eventually invest in longer study. A lot of MFA programs now have additional stage combat courses, but also the Society of American Fight Directors has summer work, and there are other organizations in the United States and in Canada and England and really all over the world now, where you could do advanced study. I studied with, I would seek out some fight masters to, if they're available, you and a partner can maybe, find a way to do private study. I worked with Petit Crane, who with the society is well known. He passed away a while ago now, but
Wasn't he the guy who staged all of Errol Flynn's fights, or many
he
of them?
did. He worked with Errol Flynn.
The famous movie actor of the 1920s, 30s, 40s.
Yeah, he worked with Errol Flynn, and so that was kind of a style that, you know, he still had that kind of, you know, movie presence, and he was wonderful to work with, and you know, as I said, you know, other fight masters. I worked with Drew Frazier and Joseph Martinez. I had mentioned David Leong.
We use a lot of Joseph Martinez's book in class because
Yes.
you had recommended it to me, and there it is.
There it
It's
is.
wonderful. It's a wonderful book for I think students are really grab onto it because it's easy to understand. It's in plain English, which is good. Excellent. Is there anything else that you wanted to let us know? I mean, we're you know, we can talk about another aspect that we haven't addressed. Is there something that you think we haven't brought up that you think students should know, people who are interested in stage combat and who are studying, that they should know about this world that you know a lot about? What would you recommend?
Yeah, I would also recommend reading a lot of plays. That you do have to not only understand what, you know, technically what you might be doing with a sword, but to really understand the range of character. If you're interested in classical work like Shakespeare, to be able to speak the verse of those plays, and then looking at what kind of violence is in contemporary. I'm working on a production of Sweat right now. And again, it has kind of that balance between, you know, some fighting that might have some structure to it. These people might know how to throw a couple punches, but then there's also the adrenaline of the character that, you know, can make things a bit sloppy, and taking a look around at what kind of scenes actors are being asked to do these days, both in classical and contemporary plays. And really understanding what might be asked of you if you get cast. If you want to teach or do fight direction, again, I think the same thing applies. You have to know script analysis. That would be one of my suggestions. Sometimes you can get really caught up in, I just want to learn all these different fights, but you also have to know then how to bring them in to character and to story.
To scene work, yeah. Without the scene work, you can't tell the story really all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, you need the. Well, that's great. Well, Colleen, thank you so much. I really appreciate your taking this time. This is something that I think is very helpful for students who are starting their journey in this world of stage combat. And thank you so much. And I hope that you are staying safe and cozy there in Stanton, and that you continue to do your work and continue to enjoy what you're working on there in Charlottesville, because it's exciting.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for asking me these questions.
Absolutely, and thank you so much, and bye-bye.
All right, bye, Stefan.
Bye.